All right, Rob Browne here with you on it is a Wednesday, Kevin. Midweek show. Doug Dean out today in Kansas City. Ronnie Sanders out sick. We got a lot to cover. You and Brendan Martin, our executive producer, were talking before the show. The state of Auburn football, we'll start with that. And you've chronicled it and covered it a long time. I've grown up with it. Bottom line, the draft came and went with barely a whimper. 3 picks out of Auburn. You wonder the record in the last 5 years. How did Auburn get where they are today? Let's start with the facts. Just the facts. With
All right.
Kevin Scarbinski, Scarbo knows, and then we'll go from there.
I got receipts, Rob. I brought the receipts today.
You did.
And it's not good, obviously. There's a direct correlation between talent level and performance on the scoreboard, as we've seen with Auburn over the last 5 years. But it's pretty eye-opening numbers. Let's see, where shall we start? Okay, how about first-round draft picks?
Yep.
And remember, it seems like an eternity, doesn't it? That 20 years ago, Auburn became the first SEC football program. Think about this now.
Yeah.
The first to have 4 first-round draft picks.
Yeah.
And 2 of them played the same position, Ronnie Browne and Carnell Williams. Ronnie went number 2 to Miami, and Carnell went number 5 to Tampa Bay, if I recall.
Tampa Bay.
And then Carlos Rogers went in the first round. He went number 9, I believe. And then Jason Campbell, the quarterback, of course, went later in the first round. From that height, Auburn is now at the point where it has not had a first-round draft pick in 5 years. That is the longest drought among any of the current 16 SEC football programs, with the exception of Vanderbilt, which hasn't had a first-rounder since 2008. If you're an SEC football program, you do not want to be in a sentence in which you and Vanderbilt are the only proper nouns.
Correct.
It's usually not a good thing.
Yeah.
So that's one way to look at it. They just don't have the elite talent that the Alabamas, the Georgias, now the Texases are stockpiling. And that's why they haven't beaten Georgia in forever. They haven't beaten Alabama since 2019. Nick Saban said it as an aside almost during the draft. I don't know if you caught this, Rob, but at one point, Ohio State, after having another player taken, and of course they led the draft in number of overall picks, and Nick Saban said that's why they won. They had the best players. It's a pretty simple formula. It's not a stone-cold lock guarantee that if you have the best players, you're going to win the national championship. But I will say this, another fun fact in all of this research I did, that every national champion, starting with LSU in 2019 through Ohio State this past season, had the most picks in the next NFL draft. Either they were alone in first place, or they were tied for first place in NFL draft picks coming off of a national championship, which tells you that those rosters were stocked with NFL talent and experienced college talent that was going to go into the NFL the next season. So that's another way to look at it. And then from Auburn, and this is really, there are only so many picks in the first round. You build your roster in college now if you want to compete for a championship, and at the NFL level across all 7 rounds. So it means something. I know we can talk about players slipping in the draft. That was a hot topic with one player in particular.
Yeah.
One quarterback, although one quarterback didn't get enough discussion, and that's the guy from Texas. Maybe we'll discuss that. I don't know. But
I do want to talk about him, yeah.
But think about this. So Auburn did not have a pick in the first 3 rounds. That's the second straight year that has happened to the Tigers. That had not happened to the Tigers in consecutive years since 1982 and 1983. That is amazing to me, Rob. That's when Pat Dye was just getting the program built.
Yeah.
and bringing in the right kind of players and developing those players in the right way. So it's been that long since they'd gone 2 straight years without a draft pick in the first 3 rounds. That's obviously not how you compete in your rivalries. It's not how you compete for an SEC championship, let alone a playoff berth. So that's what Hugh Freeze was dead on when he got there, and he said, it's going to take time to build the kind of talent level they need to compete in the SEC. He was absolutely right about that. Now, they've started, as we've seen, to build that up. And there's really 3 markers to me, Rob. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. There is signing day, there's game day, and there's draft day. And of course, signing day is more than one day, and draft day is more than one day. But you know what I mean. There is, how do you perform in bringing in talent? How do you develop that talent to win games on the field? And then how do you develop that talent so it moves on to the NFL? Auburn has made improvement on signing day. It's still lagging on game day and draft day.
Yeah, but I'll start looking at some numbers. 2020 February class that Auburn signed 3 or 4 of the top 15 players in Georgia. Since then, when Auburn's getting kids out of Georgia, it's the 23rd player, the 45th player, the 60th player. We can all remember when Auburn got the number 1 player, like at Takeo Spikes. Go back. In fact, Auburn has done so well in Georgia historically that The Athletic about 5 years ago had an all-time Auburn team of players from Georgia versus the all-time team from players from the state of Alabama. And they could do the same thing for Florida as well.
That's pretty. I'll bet that would be a pretty competitive game if you could get those guys in their prime. I can only imagine. Ronnie Browne, was from Georgia. Again, he was a number 2 pick overall in that 2005 draft, coming off that undefeated season in 2004.
Yeah, and a great baseball player too. I mean, I think that was his first love out of Cartersville. And then you look at William Andrews, James Brooks, Ken Rice. There's close to 300 lettermen all time at Auburn from the state of Georgia. And it's a pretty high number with Florida as well. But I'm going to go back and kind of do a little forensic science here. When Mark Richt took over in 2001, he began to really lock Georgia up. Tommy Tuberville and that staff recruited well in Florida, Alabama, Georgia, but they also got 9 players in the early to mid 2000s out of Brentwood Academy and Christ Presbyterian Academy in Nashville. A lot of players. And there were 2 starters. Mike Big Snacks Berry was one of them on that 2010 national championship team. You had a couple of guys from Nashville. But since then, Auburn lately has just struggled to get the kids out of Georgia. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Now you've got NIL. And when Kirby took that job at Georgia, he told him, if you're not going big, I'm not coming. And I think it looks to me like Auburn just got shut out of Georgia. Nick Saban in the state of Alabama was just killing it. So where do you go? Now you've got Ole Miss being better than they've ever been. I'm in Memphis. Got a lot of Ole Miss friends. They got a lot of money, and they're enjoying what they're doing.
Hey, Rob, think about this.
Yeah.
A couple of thoughts on that. First of all, Ole Miss had more players drafted than Alabama.
Exactly. That's
8 to 7.
Yeah.
When is the last time that happened?
Has not happened. It just Alabama
was 4th in the SEC in total draft picks.
Yeah.
7 draft picks is not bad, but they were 4th.
Yeah.
Behind Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss. And that's the lowest Alabama has finished in the SEC in total draft picks since 2009.
Yeah.
So that tells you something. And it also, I can tell you this, I know from people that I've talked to through the years, I can remember when Kirby got the Georgia job, he basically quietly, privately, unlike Lance Thompson, who when he joined the Tennessee staff from Alabama said, we're putting up a fence around Memphis. And about a minute and a half later, Alabama got a commitment from a player out of Memphis.
Yeah, yes.
Kirby was smart enough to do this quietly and privately, like I said, behind the scenes. But he basically said Auburn's pipeline to Georgia is done. It's shut off. We are not letting – the best players in this state are not going to be playing at Auburn anymore. And he hasn't been perfect on that vow, but he's been pretty darn close.
Yeah. And see, that's what happened. And Auburn – look, I had an Auburn booster tell me this 3 years ago. I couldn't believe it. This is a very, very powerful Auburn booster. He said he got a call from a coach at Georgia who he knew. And he said, I'm going to be completely transparent with you. What has happened to Auburn recruiting in the state of Georgia? This is when Browne Harsin was there. And he said, we couldn't come out of a kid's house or go into his house or go into a high school or out of a high school without running into Auburn coaches, or Clemson as well, which is just Auburn on the other side of Georgia. And he said, they're not here anymore. Have they given up? And Coach Dye used to say, if Georgia wants a kid who's an in-state kid in Georgia, it's damn near impossible to get them out. But they don't all want to go here. You know, Auburn's making significant headway in Beaufort, Georgia, which is a transient school that's putting $40 or $50 million into their stadium and athletic facilities. It's crazy. But Auburn's got, this guy, Josh Daniels, the quarterback transfer from Stanford. He's a Beaufort guy. And they're signing, they're getting in there. But the state of Georgia, Jason Caldwell, who is part of AU Undercover, comes on our show a lot, one of the best guys out there, and he knows recruiting. Boots on the ground. He knows it. He said a couple of years ago on Sidelines on our morning show, he said the state of Alabama is now where the state of Georgia was 10 years ago. So the state of Alabama is putting out 140, 150 Division I football players a year. Georgia's at 250. Everybody shops at Publix. They all shop at Kroger. Everybody recruits Georgia. Metro Atlanta. If Auburn doesn't have a strong presence in the state of Georgia, and I'm talking not the 70th and 80th player, but Auburn's got to get 3 or 4 of the top 20, top 25 to be in championship contention. In this millennium, Auburn is 7-18 against Georgia. And since 2006, it's been hardly anything. Auburn.
It's Cam Newton and Nick Fairley, and that's about it. And then, of course, that 2017 game with Jarrett Stidham when they just dominated Georgia, and Georgia was number one.
Yeah,
that incredible, 3-week span, I think it was when Auburn beat number one Georgia and number one Alabama.
Yeah,
and then the ultimate insult, they ended up playing for the national championship, their biggest rivals in Auburn. And Auburn didn't after losing to Georgia in the rematch in the SEC championship game. But it is obviously it's sad to me, Rob, to see what's become of the Auburn-Georgia rivalry in terms of the one-sidedness of it. And quietly, because Auburn has been competitive, at least in the games in Jordan-Hare, quietly the Alabama rivalry, the Iron Bowl, is moving in that direction. Yeah. That's one where, that the 2021 game, Auburn never should have lost that. They weren't the better team, but you can't let a team go the length of the field in the last minute and a half.
Can I stop you? I don't mean to interrupt you, but I got to ask you this.
No, go ahead.
Ask Auburn people, sober or, either way. Would you, looking back now, had Auburn beaten Alabama in 2021, would Bryan Harsin, with the potato head, still be the coach at Auburn? How much more time would that have given him? That's all I can.
That's a great after dinner drink question.
Several drinks.
Skip the dinner, go straight to the bar.
Straight to the bar
before you start discussing that one.
Yeah.
Well, my educated guess would be no, he would not still be the coach because he wasn't going to put in the work and do the kind of work and assemble the kind of staff that you need. That, like you said, was going to be out there, relentless on the recruiting trail, and wouldn't let a Lane Kiffin come in and get a Quinshon Judkins out of Pike
Yeah.
Road outside of Montgomery. Just wouldn't let that happen. So when he wanted to go to, from what I understand, originally Quinshon wanted to go to Auburn, but again, that was part of that just that attitude that Harsin and you know, it's almost it's beating a dead horse at this point.
Yeah.
To continue to kick Brian Harsin because he deserved much of the criticism that he's received. Not all, but most.
Yeah.
And their lack of effort and commitment to recruiting relentlessly, continuously was really, from a football standpoint, was his downfall.
Yeah.
You know, and I can still remember people close to the program then telling me, I remember one person who said he heard Brian Harsin say, I don't have to out-recruit Kirby Smart and Nick Saban because we can out-coach them.
Yeah.
The arrogance of that attitude, thinking that you could come in here and outsmart two of the best coaches in the country who never pretended to outsmart anyone. You can go back to Nick Saban on the plane with Mal Moore from South Florida, who said, I don't know how good a coach you got, but you got one hell of a recruiter.
Yeah.
That's how Nick Saban built his dynasty at Alabama. That's how Kirby Smart has built his mini dynasty at Georgia. Despite what Saban said on draft day, getting better players, having more good players than the other guys is a heck of an advantage to have week in and week out. And Auburn has been running uphill in that regard for years now.
Yeah. And that's why I'm trying to lay out this case in the state of Georgia. Having worked and lived in Columbus a couple of years, that used to be an Auburn town. And there were so many Auburn people over there. And now, you know, with out-of-state tuition being what it is, a couple of other factors, but Auburn should be, you know, when you ask Georgia people that cover Georgia, who talk to Georgia fans, they'll tell you, no doubt, Florida is number one rival. Georgia fans in West Georgia, you know, they look at Auburn. But again, look at history. In the 1950s, Auburn won that series. They won like 6 out of 10. In the 60s, Auburn won the series. They won the majority of the games. In the 70s, Auburn won the majority. In the 80s, Auburn won the majority. In the 90s, Auburn won the majority. It started in 2000 to 2009. Auburn was 4-6. 2010 to 2019, they played twice in 2017. Auburn was 3-8. And then you look at 20 through 24 in these last 5 years, Auburn is 0-5. And Alabama hadn't beaten Alabama since 2019. So here's Hugh Freeze. These great recruiting classes, Kevin. We both know about it. But how do you recover from your Brian Harsin's first class, February of 21? The only one that stuck it out was Jarquez Hunter. Everybody else left. It's hard to have a law firm if all your young associates sprint out of there in the first couple of years. There's no future there. But let's
say this, Rob.
Yeah,
Let's say
we're getting somewhere.
I would say that this streak that Auburn's on, no first-round draft picks.
Yeah.
No top 3-round draft picks the last couple of years.
Yeah.
It's going to end next year.
Yes.
Barring something unforeseen, it is going to end. Keldrick Faulk is a first-round draft pick waiting to happen. If he has the kind of if he improves and builds upon the kind of season he just had, he will be. I have no doubt he'll be a first-round draft pick next year.
Yeah, I agree.
The kind of guy that is a difference maker consistently on defense, can wreck an offense, can wreck a drive, can turn a game with a sack, a turnover, a strip sack, maybe. That's the kind of player that Auburn has had too few of in recent years.
Yeah. Well, you got to have in every recruiting class, you want to ideally have 2 or 3 difference makers on offense, 2 or 3 difference makers on defense, and you better get it right on special teams. I was talking to my son, graduated from Auburn 3 years ago. He stays in touch with Jamie and Sherwood. They're friends. He just signed a 3-year deal with the Jets for $40+ million out of Jensen Beach, Florida. And that was I think there was a Marcus Woodson recruit. But, when Philip Lolly was at Auburn, and I know Coach Lolly, I'm sure you do too, there was a certain mentality, Spartan work ethic. Now, you've got to get that back. But with DeMarcus Riddick out of Clanton, Alabama, this is the guy. Jason Caldwell told me his senior year he played a lot of safety. He was such a good athlete. They can play wherever they need him. But as a pure linebacker, he's a special talent. And you talk about Keldrick Falk out of Highland Home, Alabama. I mean, you and I both stood next to that kid. He's 6'6", 285.
Legit.
And he looks like he weighs 215 pounds. I say, kid, yeah.
He moves like he weighs 215.
Yeah. I mean, that's what a 5-star pick looks like. And he was going to Florida State. And you mentioned Quinshon Judkins out of Pike Road. Now, we're told that Auburn and Alabama didn't have anything to do with him, and that Kiffin went down there and would go into his games.
You remember that picture of Kiffin in the rain sitting
Exactly.
in the stands by himself?
Is that true? That Auburn and Alabama?
Yes. Well,
how did you miss on that kid?
My understanding is Auburn was late, didn't make much of an effort. Again, that was the Harsin staff.
Wow.
Which is just hard to believe when he's just down the road. And again, people who should know have told me he was very much interested in Auburn, but far more than Auburn was interested in him.
Yeah.
Which is a shame.
And
by the way, I'm looking up. Go ahead, Rob, because I'm looking up something really cool from the NBA, from the NFL draft, and of course, both of the running backs at Ohio State, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, both got drafted. And if you looked at their numbers from last year, I can't seem to find it here. I've got too many notes and things here, but they ran when their last year at Auburn, Ronnie Browne and Cadillac Williams, who went a lot higher in the draft than Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins.
Yes.
They had combined, I think it's about 2 yards more. It's uncanny how close it was. The total rushing yards for Ronnie Browne and Cadillac Williams in 2004 when Auburn went undefeated, but unfortunately there wasn't a 4-team or a 12-team playoff then. And then you compare that to the number of rushing yards of Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson at Ohio State this past year when they played more games, didn't go undefeated, but there was a 12-team playoff and they were able to win it. And it was almost identical. It's amazing. But the importance of the running game for both of those teams obviously carried them a long way. And it just shows. And it was nice. Isn't it nice to see that running backs are gaining a little more respect now with what Ashton Genty did getting drafted so high, what Saquon Barkley's done in the NFL, helping the Eagles win a Super Bowl. For those of us who remember, my first year covering Auburn for the Birmingham News was Bo Jackson's senior year.
Yeah.
And as good as Bo Jackson was, Brett Fullwood wasn't far behind.
Number 4.
Think about how good those. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So you had the number 1 pick in Bo and the number 4 pick in Brent Fullwood. And they weren't the only good backs in that era, but it's nice to see the running back position regain some of its prominence and people recognizing that both on the college level and the NFL level.
Well, you look at kind of a high water mark was Trent Richardson out of Escambia County High School, Pensacola, played at Alabama. The April 2012 draft, he was the number 4 overall pick. Didn't have a great career with the Indianapolis Colts, okay? And all of a sudden, every running back is punished for that. But lately, you're right. Bijan Robinson out of Texas last year goes number 9 to the Falcons. As soon as we think we've got it all figured out, that it's all about the wide receiver game, somebody is going to break ranks and go the other way. It's like when our kids were 7, 8 years old playing soccer. Everybody's around the ball, but if somebody's out there on point by themselves and the ball gets kicked away, you're home free to a goal. So I think that's where we're going. Art Kehoe, great offensive line coach at Miami, said at an offensive, at a football conference, an offensive line coach told me this. He predicted 35 years ago the prima donnas going forward would be the wide receivers. Your Chad Johnsons, your Terrell Owens, your Odell Beckham Jr.'s. He was right. You you don't really see running backs with that attitude because they got a lot more loving for their offensive linemen than the wideouts who some of them don't even go to the huddle. They're out there just doing this, like, get the ball to me. Because, every wide receiver is wide open on every play. That's just the fact.
In their minds, yes,
Yeah, of
absolutely,
course. Of
absolutely.
course.
Yeah, but how about but it is nice to see. How about Cam Scatteraboo? What he meant to Arizona
Wow.
State. Is that dude a football player?
Yes.
That's
He is
the definition of a football player.
he is as tough as it gets. So now let's get back with Auburn. Great work by AU Undercover. They put out Christian Clemente, Nathan King, Philip Marshall, Jason Caldwell, the whole team. They put out a position by position breakdown in terms of experience. So you look at the 10 positions. You know what position group has the most combined starts? That's the offensive line with 82. When you
That's
combine
huge.
the other 9 position groups, combined starts total for the other 9 is 88. Now, when Auburn won the national championship against Oregon in 2011, January 22-19, when that game ended, the 5 offensive line starters for Auburn that walked off that field holding up the number 1 had a combined 176 starts. And, guys like Lee Zimba, Ryan Pugh, Mike Big Snacks Berry, there was some talent, but there was experience. Kevin, you've been to so many practices. I've been to a good many, but you've forgotten more than I know. Why can't people get it through their head that experience, kind of when you're playing somebody in a sport that's older than you and they're really good and you think you're better than them, age and wisdom will usually overcome youth and treachery and stupidity. My dad always tells me.
Put that on a poster.
My dad always tells me that.
I like
I'd
that.
play him in handball. I'd have to beat him 21-19, and he'd get me a lot too. But
you know who's really understood that very, very well is college basketball.
Yes.
I mean, you look at the teams in the Final Four. You look at Auburn.
Yeah.
Look at Florida. Look at Houston. And contrast those 3 full of veterans, many who didn't start at those programs but transferred in, but spent more than a year there, like Janai Broome. Those guys developed together.
Yeah.
And Duke went the old John Calipari one-and-done route.
Mm-hmm.
And while they had a great season, they won the ACC, a very depleted ACC, a weakened ACC, but they did win it. They won the regular season. They won the tournament. They got to the Final Four. Give them credit for that. But when the going got tough, they weren't as tough as Houston. No. And that's why they didn't even make it to the national championship game. And Auburn, unfortunately, ran into a team that was as experienced and tough and hard-nosed in Florida, in guys who weren't spoiled. They weren't all 5 stars. They weren't told from the time they were 10 or 12 years old that they were the greatest player in their age group in the country.
Yeah.
Those guys had to earn everything they got, just like the Auburn guys. That's why, that Auburn had the misfortune to have its best basketball team ever in the same year that Florida had one of its best teams ever, but a team that was just as experienced and certainly a little bit deeper on the front line, which I think was really the difference in that game, more so than Walter Clayton. But anyway, basketball gets it. Experience matters. And that's why, we had a great conversation last week with Rick Trickett.
Yes.
Former Auburn offensive line coach, now at Jacksonville State. He's seen it all. And that's why I asked him, is it harder now? Because we all know, if you know anything about football, continuity on the offensive line is one of the most important attributes your team can have. Those guys that you just very well delineated the number of starts on the 2010 offensive line. When those guys stay together and they go through growing pains, by the time they get to be juniors, seniors, redshirts, seniors, 5-year guys, that's when you have championship offensive lines. And it seems to me it's harder to do that now because of the transfer portal, because of NIL, and that's what I asked Rick about, because how do you keep guys when certainly at the Jack State level, if they show what they're capable of, they're getting opportunities to move up to the SEC, to go to your Auburns, your Georgias, your Floridas, your Alabamas. How do you keep guys even at an Auburn when you have a school like Texas out there? Did you see this story? I wanted to bring this up and get your thought. According to Kirk Bowles, longtime columnist in the state of Texas, used to be at the Austin American Statesman. Now he's at the Houston Chronicle. He wrote a story this week that said Texas's payroll for its football team for this upcoming season is going to be, between revenue sharing, which everyone expects is going to be adopted, even though the judge basically scolded everyone and said, you need to do this. You need to get this roster limits thing figured out, or I'm not going to approve this settlement. But she probably will approve it. They'll probably make the adjustment she asked for. But between revenue sharing, in which the schools pay the players directly, and NIL, which is available on top of that, that Texas's payroll is $35 to $40 million for its 2025 football team. Now, remember how everyone was outraged when the number 20 million was attached to Ohio State's roster last year? Did the cost of doing business just double to 40 million? Here's you're a numbers guy, Rob. You'll appreciate this. So if you, and this, they wouldn't do it this way, but if we have 105-man roster limits for this upcoming season, which is the proposal part of the House settlement agreement, if you have 105 men on your roster and you want to pay every one of them out of that 40 million, you pay everyone exactly the same. Every one of those 105 players would earn $380,953. Every player on the roster. If you want to do it that way, nobody's doing it that way. So that's kind of fanciful, but it puts it in perspective, though. Think about it. You could make $380,000 to play one season of college football at the University of Texas next year, potentially.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting?
Is that scary? Is that scary?
It is scary
because not everybody. I'm not Auburn and Alabama. I talked to a very prominent booster in the SEC in this state in recent weeks, and they asked the question, and they're concerned: can Alabama and Auburn compete financially with the likes of Texas and Texas A&M and Ohio State, et cetera? It's a good question.
Well, bringing in Texas and Oklahoma to the league, there's a lot of pluses, but it reminds me of the time when I had this aquarium when I was a kid, and I didn't know it at the time, a largemouth bass. He wasn't that big, and I brought him home and I put him in my aquarium, and quickly I had no other fish. It was sad. I was like, what happened? And
I'm glad my turtle, I have a turtle we found in our pool skimmer. His name is Skimmer.
Yeah.
Sitting next to me in his little condominium, his little aquatic condominium. So I'm glad I don't have anything else in there that can eat him.
Yeah. So here we are. We bring Texas in, and my good friend Dave Cody, who was the anchor man at Channel 7 in Austin for 30 plus years. We need to get Dave to come on here. He watches the show every day out in Bellingham, Washington. He moved out there a couple of years ago. He had an older brother, Wild Bill Cody, was an All-American linebacker at Auburn in the late 60s. And
remember the name, yes.
Great Auburn family. But and also I've got a friend who watches our show. I graduated high school with him. He's living out in Texas, and they're big into cutting horses. And I said, is that Taylor Sheridan? I mean, he's really good at riding them. He walked on at Texas when we were all in college. He paid his dues. Great guy. Jimmy watches his show a lot. The Texas money, remember that the state legislature every year, the appropriation is 2/3 to Austin, 1/3 to College Station. And that oil, most of it's coming out in Midland, Odessa, West Texas, WTI, West Texas Intermediate, 4.2 million barrels per day coming out of the ground. So the oil right, there's just ridiculous money. Texas's endowment is over $43 billion. A&M is pushing 20 when you add all the campuses in. And, you know, only God and the Longhorns have more money than the Aggies. Well, we brought Texas into this league, and they are – remember the old TV show Dallas?
Oh, yes.
It's a room full of J.R. Ewings, and they all love the Longhorns. And you've got so much – and then every time we stop at Buc-ee's, here we go, just remember that's an A&M guy.
Yeah, where did Buc-ee's begin?
Jacksonville, Texas in 1982.
In Texas.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So, and then you've got the Haslams with the pilot stations. That's Tennessee money. Every time you're eating some chicken tenders, the Tysons, you know, Stevens Investment Firm, largest off Wall Street bank in America, is in Little Rock. Warren Stevens just retired 2 weeks ago. I was with some of his friends Friday. He's going to be, I think, the new U.S. ambassador to Great Britain. Got to have something to do.
Yeah.
When you're worth over
nice
7
retirement present, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But here it is, Texas. This is insanity. I think 8 or 9 of their players on last year's teams have Lamborghinis. Now, there's a lot of money at Auburn and Alabama, but there comes a point where if this doesn't stop, you're going to be trying to fight a forest fire out in Yellowstone with garden hoses.
Think about this, Rob. The last, and I'm gonna narrow this down to Texas. If you go back 8 years, and we started off talking about the NFL draft, and Alabama has been the gold standard.
Yeah.
17 straight years now with a first-round pick. They just continue to add to their record on that score. But if you go back 8 years, which I think was after Kirby's first full year at Georgia, Alabama and Georgia have each turned out 75 players who were drafted by the NFL over 8 years. If you narrow it to the last 4 years, Georgia has had 46 draft picks. Alabama's had 34. That's a 12-player difference in Georgia's favor. And if you go back only 3 years, both Georgia and Texas have had more draft picks than Alabama. So you're seeing Alabama had that talent advantage for years under Nick Saban. It's why they won so many championships.
Correct.
Well, now they've started to dip. Georgia's up here. Texas is now moving up here. And how do you combat that? And look, do you remember, Rob, do you remember during SEC Media Days last year? I remember watching with Nick Saban. Of course, that was his debut as a full-time talking head. And I remember him saying they were discussing this idea that was tossed around, certainly by Big 12 schools forever, that Texas ran the show. It was all about Texas. Whatever league Texas was in, the Big 8, the Big 12, they weren't in the Big 8. They were in the Southwest Conference. My bad. The Southwest Conference, the Big 12, Texas was the big dog or the big Longhorn. They ran the show. The leagues catered to them. And Nick Saban laughed and said, that ain't happening in the SEC. Texas is not going to run the SEC. Well, not so fast, my friend. Let's look at Texas's first year in the SEC, which isn't even over yet. At the moment, Texas baseball, number 1 in the country.
Yeah.
They're 19-2 in the SEC. That matches the best record after 21 games. It's only been done twice before since the SEC went to a 30-game baseball schedule in 1996.
Yeah. Texas
softball, about 3 weeks ago, they were number 1 in the country. They slipped a little bit. They got swept by Oklahoma this past weekend, and now they're down to number 5. They played for the national championship, by the way, last year and lost to Oklahoma, which has now won 4 in a row.
Yeah.
Texas women's basketball. They were number 1 in the country for 2 weeks this past season. They got to the Final Four. They got to the SEC women's tournament championship game, lost to South Carolina. Got to the Final Four, lost there to South Carolina. But they were competing for a national championship. And Texas football was number 1 in the country for 2 weeks. They had the best regular season record in the SEC, lost to Georgia in the championship game, got into the playoff, and they went deeper in the playoff, getting to the semifinals than anybody else in the SEC. That's a pretty powerful. You got 4. Men's basketball didn't live up to that, and they fired their coach and hired Sean Miller.
Yeah.
4 of the top 5 main sports, the most popular sports, let's put it that way. They've been number 1 in the country at some point in this academic year. I've asked people at the SEC to try to confirm for me if that's ever happened before. I'm going to guess it hasn't. That nobody's had that many teams of the top 5 most popular sports, that 4 of them you've had your teams ranked number 1 at some point in the season. And that's Texas's first year in the league.
Yeah.
They haven't exactly had growing pains.
No. Well, let me throw another one at you. We had Chris Plank on the show yesterday morning, the sideline reporter for the Boomer Sooner Football Network, Plank Show, out in Oak City, Monday through Friday. Great show. Chris said, I asked him about the new softball stadium. Softball only at OU. Love's Field. We've all stopped at a Love's Travel Plaza, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Another Boomer Sooner. So what are we going to do? You know, Tennessee is benefiting every time you go to a Pilot station. Oklahoma's benefiting every time you go to Love's. A&M every time you go to Buc-ee's. And every time you put gas in your vehicle, West Texas Intermediate crude oil or Brent Sea crude, which is what we see mainly on the eastern seaboard, it's more expensive. Think of Landman. Think of Billy Bob Thornton in that great TV show, The Landman. I've got a friend in my hunting club who's in the land management business in West Texas. There's so much money out there, folks. We don't know what we're going to do with it, but I think it's a wake-up call to people, and I think the wake-up call is we've brought Texas in, we brought OU, and last year at SEC Media Days, one of the first questions was Commissioner Sankey, Monday morning when he addresses the state of the conference, why Dallas? Why is Media Days in Dallas? I mean, well, we had discussed that I think 6 years ago about doing it. Really? Okay, that's right. Well, you see why A&M hates Texas. Now, there's respect between Auburn and Alabama and Auburn and Georgia. That's because we're all married into each other. I mean, my wife's Evolved for life. My oldest daughter's Alabama grad. Everything else is Auburn. But there's hatred between A&M and Texas. Hatred. And it ain't because of lack of money, but there's respect with Auburn and Alabama. Is Ohio State becoming the new Alabama, or is Texas quickly? Philip Marshall chronicled this brilliantly. One of the best writers in the business. Love Philip. And he's part of AU Undercover, and hopefully he'll write forever. Philip Marshall, I think, prior to joining the SEC, Texas had lost 4 games or more in like 8 of the previous 10 seasons. They'd only had maybe 1 or 2 first-round offensive line draft picks in the last 15 years. And look what Sark is selling out there. Now let's shift that to Hugh Freeze and Auburn. When Hugh Freeze was at Ole Miss, he got 1 year, he signed 4 of the top 12 players in the country. Robert Kimdichie was the number 1 player out of Alpharetta, Georgia, Milton High School. You know who the number 2 player was that year? He came to Auburn. Carl Lawson. He came. Kimdichie was from Loganville, Grayson High School.
Okay.
Kimdichie,
right.
yeah. Carl Lawson was from Milton and Alpharetta. The number 9 player that year was Montravius Adams, 6'4", 305-pound defensive lineman out of, as he called it, Vienna, Georgia.
A player.
Dooley County High School.
He was a player.
6'4", 305 with no waist. He had no fat on him. I mean, Auburn is starting to get those kind of players again. You got Keldrick Falk. This kid Malik Autry out of Opelika. And this isn't a beat up on Auburn. I mean, that's not what we're doing, but it's like, hey, man, let's be truth brokers. That's how we always do it. There's not the experience, Kevin, but when you look at this Auburn defensive front 7, it's way, as Jason Caldwell said, when Freeze took over, That was the worst roster in my lifetime. And I seconded that opinion. It was depleted. God bless these guys on the team. They're somebody's sons. God love them. But you cannot win the Kentucky Derby with a plow mule. You got to have the studs. And Georgia in the last 6 years has had 62 players drafted. Kirby Smart's got more losses since he's been at Georgia at 19 than first-round draft picks, which is 20. We're into stats, But
well, again, you got to have the players, and if I don't have these numbers in front of me, or in my head, but if you did watch the NFL draft, how many offensive and defensive linemen, especially offensive linemen, because obviously there are more spots on the offensive line, but how many of those guys were drafted? Those positions, any coach who's had any success long term will tell you. I don't care how you got to have a good quarterback that can make plays, and you have to have skill position players who can make plays. But if you aren't solid in the trenches, if you don't have men on either side of the ball up front, you're not going to be consistently good. You're not going to compete for championships. Got to have those big guys up front. And it takes time to develop them. As we said with offensive linemen, it's hard to develop continuity if you got guys coming and going.
Yeah.
When you can keep those guys together is when you can really build something special. So that's where it's, and again, Freeze was spot on. He wasn't poor mouthing. He wasn't inventing excuses when he got there. And he said, basically, it's going to take, what did he say? 3 years?
Yeah.
So three full recruiting classes.
3 full.
To get back to the kind of roster you need to compete in the SEC. And he was right about that. And he's made inroads there.
Yeah.
But Georgia's not backing up. Texas isn't backing up. Texas has only gotten better, as you described, since Sark has been there on the recruiting trail and the development end of it as well. So it's a challenge, and that's why it's such a shame that Auburn made that mistake with Harsin, because you fall down in this league. Yeah. It's hard to climb back up. It's really hard to climb back up towards the top. Auburn knows it can get there because it's been there. It's been there in not that long ago. And here's the encouraging thing, Rob. I would say this. How many games the last 2 years woulda, coulda, shoulda from an Auburn standpoint? Alabama 2023.
Yeah.
Georgia 2023. In Jordan-Hare. Oklahoma last year, Cal last. I mean, we could go on and on.
Yeah.
And you can't get it back. And close doesn't count. It only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades.
Correct.
As they say.
Correct.
But I remember, I wish I could remember who said this originally, that when you're building a program and you take over a program that's really down, as Auburn football was, the first thing you do is you lose big because you just don't have the horses.
Yeah.
Then if you make improvement, then you start to lose close. Then you start to win those close games. And if you continue to build, then you start to win big. And Auburn's now shifted from the losing big part of the scale to losing close. The Texas A&M win was encouraging last year. So now they've got to push that ball a little bit more across the line to where you win those close games. You're not going to blow out Alabama. You're not going to blow out Georgia. If you're going to beat them, you're going to beat them close. But you got to find ways to win those games.
Yeah.
That's where they are now. And so much of that is going to come down to the quarterback play.
Yeah.
Because quarterbacks can make plays that can win you games, and they can make plays that can lose you games. And nobody knows that better the last couple of years in Auburn.
And I like to look at charts, graphs, numbers, trends. And I've been doing that. I was up late last night looking at Auburn's schedule the last 2 years under Hugh Freeze. So many close losses. Quarterback play, subpar. Offensive line, again, Jason Caldwell has chronicled it so well. While Georgia, LSU, and Alabama were out there stockpiling offensive linemen, Auburn was doing little to nothing bringing an offensive lineman.
And that goes back, Robin, you know this very well.
to Gus.
That didn't start, didn't start with Brian Harsin.
Yeah,
that's a big part of that is on Gus.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many people I've had around Auburn tell me he just didn't place an emphasis on that position, which is mind-boggling.
It is.
For an offensive guy in particular.
Yeah.
To think that you could get by with mediocre offensive linemen and you didn't need to just hammer that position every day, be out there trying to find the best guys and bring them in and develop them and keep them together. It's just, that drop off at that position, that very critical position started under Gus. Absolutely.
It did. And I go back to some comments made by Braden Smith out of Olathe, Kansas, 14, 15, 16, 17, multi-year starter on the offensive line for Auburn, second-round draft pick of the Indianapolis Colts. And I think it was him. I think it was. But he talked about that the offense that he was part of in college as an offensive lineman, it just didn't do a whole lot to prepare you. You go back to April of 2014 when Greg Robinson out of Thibodaux, Louisiana, Auburn offensive lineman, was the number 2 pick in the draft. And last time I heard about him, he was in El Paso involved in some, crazy stuff. I don't even know what he's doing now. But he's out of football. He was a bust. So I think word got out. And Kevin, I know this comes as a shock, but I think Auburn's rivals used that against them in recruiting, believe it or not. I'm sure they did. I know. I thought you'd gone mute for a second. So Auburn's had to overcome that.
No.
But what I see, this Auburn collective, Ever to Conquer, that I know about, the guy running it is so on fire with Auburn. He gets it. And they are working their asses off. And if you look in the last 3 years in the portal, and Auburn Undercover pointed out, it backed up what I thought, but it's true. They're really not losing the people they want to keep at Auburn. The 3 C's, campus, culture, coaching. That's what's keeping these guys at Auburn. And I think when we start looking at data, because the transfer portal came around October 15th of 2018. Tom Mars, attorney in Little Rock, was the guy that really kind of made that happen. You know what Tom Mars, Dudley Dawson, told us this morning, hogville.net? He's going after Madden Iamaliava for that money he took from the Razor's Edge Arkansas collective. Wow, he's kind of been there, and now he's coming back here. Like Dudley said, it may cost you $400,000 in legal bills to get back the $200,000, but
that's a serious course correction right there.
That's right.
When you've got Tom Mars switching sides.
Is this the shot over the bow? I mean, we'll see what happens with this.
Well,
but Kevin, it's a start, but I think about Auburn, and I'm not biased in saying this. It is a culture that it's different. As Doug Dean always says on this show, Auburn doesn't have the championships that Georgia and Alabama do. Auburn fans kind of enjoy them in dog years. But there's no fan base like this Auburn fan base, and they're doing whatever they got to do. Question is, can you compete? I don't think – I think there's going to be something's going to happen to slow down the Texas, because that's ridiculous, because they have unlimited funds from the Permian Basin, and that is a monopoly almost. That's what antitrust laws were put there for, by the way.
Here's the silver lining for the Auburns of the world. That if and look, Kirk Bowles he has a long track record. He knows people in that state. If he reports that Texas has a $35 to $40 million roster this football season, I take him at his word.
I do too.
However, I think this is an aberration, and will be for this reason. When the two sides in the House versus NCAA case, and we should remind people that the defendants are the NCAA and the power conferences in this deal. That when they started negotiating a settlement that a lot of people tried to get out ahead of it, and they agreed on revenue sharing, which will allow the schools to pay players directly. And again, if the judge, Claudia Wilkin, if she approves this agreement in the next couple of weeks, if they can satisfy her and they grandfather in these roster spots that were going to be cut, a lot of walk-ons were going to lose their spots. If they'll agree to grandfather that in, she will approve the settlement. And that settlement, to get ahead of it, because this has gotten some discussion, there is now going to be oversight. Imagine that. What a concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be oversight over NIL deals. And if it goes as planned, they will look at these deals, everything over $600 in value.
Full disclosure.
That you have got to justify that it is fair market value that you are receiving for this marketing service, whatever it might be, this use of your name, image, or likeness that you're allowing to happen. You're getting compensated for it. But if we know that, what it costs to do a commercial, or what the talent gets paid to do a local car commercial, for example.
Yeah.
If you're going to say that the star running back for XYZ University is going to get $3 million to do a series of local car commercials, guess what? That's not fair market value. That is pay to play. That's supposed to be under the purview of the revenue sharing part of this agreement. And they will flag that. So I think a lot of schools, and it's not just my opinion, a lot of schools were trying to get out ahead of this before this agreement's in place, before this clearinghouse comes online, before they start reviewing NIL deals to whether they are indeed meeting fair market value standards. They're front loading now, that they are throwing ridiculous amounts of NIL money. They're doing it in basketball. They're doing it in football. And that's inflating the cost of a roster, the payroll of a roster, if you will, for next year. And I think there's going to be a scaling back of this. Again, if this new system works as planned, then there will be bumps in the road, I'm sure. There will be legal challenges as well. But you're not going to see $40 million rosters in college football. No. That is not sustainable, but for a very small handful of schools, and I don't think that's going to fly. So we'll see how it all turns out, but that's pretty amazing, $40 million for a college football roster when, again, there was outrage because people said that Ohio State's roster last year was $20 million.
Yeah.
They got what they paid for. They won a national championship.
Now you're including that $21.5 million on the House settlement. So that's,
yes,
maybe 17, 18 million from Texas. And then on top of that, that's why it's also.
That's a good point, Rob. That's assuming that the settlement agreement is signed off on by the judge.
Yeah.
And then, so if 20.5 million is your total revenue sharing amount, that doesn't all go to football. A large portion of it is going to football.
It will.
So above and beyond that is an awful lot of NIL money that I don't think they're going to be able to justify going forward once that agreement.
And we got to wrap it up. But I'm going to say what's going to save us potentially is Title IX, because the only laws the NCAA has to be concerned with are antitrust laws. And when the Title IX suits start coming up saying, okay, then you have to give an equal amount of money to the women's sports, all of a sudden the appetite for this stuff might abate somewhat. Hey, for executive producer Brendan Martin, the best in the business, Scarbo knows, Kevin Scarbinski, come to this channel, our YouTube channel. Brendan is the wizard of all. There's tons of content here every day. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it. I think we solved a lot of the world's problems. Not all of them, but we got a great start. See y'all tomorrow.